time where worlds align. AI story time. Let's redefine.
We are now on the quest for our 7 basic plots. In the fading village of Eldros, where the land and its people withered, farmhand Leora longed for more. When the elder Ira revealed that the Sunstone, a relic hidden in the distant Mount Karazir, could restore life to their world, Leora answered the call.
In the quiet village of Eldros, nestled between towering mountains and whispering forests, there lived a humble farmhand named Leora. With the sky perpetually gray and the village plagued by an unnerving silence, life had grown stagnant. Crops wilted in the fields, rivers trickled into dry beds, and no birds sang in the mornings. It seemed as if nature itself had lost its breath. But Leora, a young woman with untamed red hair and a stubborn heart, felt the weight of a deeper emptiness. Each morning, as she gathered eggs from the chicken coop or carried pails of water from the well, she would look to the horizon, to the mist-covered peaks far beyond, and wonder what lay there. There was something she had always felt, an inexplicable pull toward the unknown. Some days, it gnawed at her more fiercely, as if the mountains called her name on the wind. And lately, the call had become louder. It all began one cold evening when the village's wise elder, Ira, visited her family's cottage. Wrapped in a heavy cloak and leaning on her gnarled walking staff, Ira's cloudy eyes fixed on Leora, as if seeing straight through her. "There is a quest you must undertake," she said, her voice rough as stones. "The land is dying, and so is your spirit, but it can be healed. The ancient relic of the Sunstone lies hidden in the distant Mount Karazir. You must retrieve it and bring back its light, or all will be lost." Leora's mother gasped, her father shook his head. But Leora, her heart leaped. Though fear gnawed at her, the promise of something more filled her with an overwhelming desire to take the journey. She knew, in her bones, this was the call she had been waiting for. "I'll go," Leora whispered, more to herself than to the elder. But Ira heard her and nodded solemnly. The next morning, Leora set off before dawn, her only companions a bow strapped to her back, a dagger at her side, and a loyal old horse named Ember. The path was treacherous from the start. Beyond the village, the land turned wild and untamed. For the first time in her life, Leora entered the dark forests, where twisted branches clutched at her cloak and strange sounds echoed through the undergrowth. Days passed in a blur of cold, hunger, and solitude. Her hands grew calloused from gripping the reins, and her feet ached from long hours of walking. But even as exhaustion pulled at her, she pressed on. The thought of the Sunstone, its golden light restoring her world, drove her forward. On the 7th day, Leora encountered her first trial. As she journeyed through a rocky ravine, the ground trembled beneath her. From the shadows of the cliffs emerged a towering beast, its skin made of craggy stone, its eyes glowing with molten fire. A Gorlak, a creature of the mountains, feared by the villagers for its relentless rage. Leora froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The Gorlak let out a deafening roar that echoed through the ravine, causing the rocks to quiver. It charged toward her with earth-shaking steps. For a moment, Leora considered turning back, but something deeper than fear rooted her in place, an instinctual need to face this challenge. With a sharp breath, she pulled her bow from her back and notched an arrow. Time seemed to slow as the creature lumbered closer. She aimed for its glowing eyes, trusting her steady hands and keen sight. As the Gorlak loomed within striking distance, she released the arrow. It struck true. The arrow embedded itself into the creature's molten eye, and with a shuddering howl, the Gorlak staggered back, clutching its face. But it wasn't enough to stop it entirely. Leora sprinted forward, dagger in hand, and with a precise leap, climbed onto the creature's broad, rocky back. With one swift strike, she plunged her dagger into the creature's neck, severing the line of glowing veins beneath its stone skin. The Gorlak fell, motionless, to the ground. Leora stood panting, staring at the defeated beast. She had faced her first great challenge, but she knew it wouldn't be her last. The deeper Leora ventured into the mountains, the more difficult the path became. Snow began to blanket the land, and biting winds lashed against her face. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the mountains themselves were testing her resolve. One night, as the snow fell heavily around her, Leora found shelter in a cave. Her fingers, numb with cold, struggled to light a fire. She hadn't seen another living soul in days, and doubt began to creep into her mind. What if she never found the Sunstone? What if this quest had been a mistake? As she sat by the weak flicker of the fire, shivering under her fur-lined cloak, she heard a voice. It was soft, like a whisper carried on the wind, but unmistakable. "You've come far, but you must go farther still." Leora looked up, startled, but saw no one. Her heart raced as the voice continued. "Beyond the peak of Mount Karasor lies the Temple of the Sun. There you will find what you seek. But be warned, one final trial awaits you." Leora rose to her feet, the fire crackling beside her. The voice was gone, leaving only the howling wind in its place. She didn't know if it had been a dream or a vision, but she knew what she had to do. With renewed determination, she gathered her belongings and set out once more, climbing higher and higher toward the peak. Days later, Leora stood before the entrance of the Temple of the Sun, an ancient structure carved into the mountain itself. Its towering doors were engraved with symbols long forgotten by her people, and an eerie golden light seeped from the cracks. She pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls lined with towering statues of ancient gods. At the center of the room, suspended above a stone pedestal, hovered the Sunstone, a glowing, pulsating orb of pure light. It radiated warmth and power, and for a moment, Leora felt a sense of peace wash over her. But then the room grew cold. Shadows began to gather at the edges of the chamber, coalescing into a dark, menacing form. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, cloaked in black, with eyes like burning coals. "You have come for the Sunstone," the figure hissed, its voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "But it is not yours to take." Leora gripped her dagger tightly. She had come too far to turn back now. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting like smoke. "To claim the Sunstone, you must prove yourself worthy. You must face your greatest fear." Before Leora could react, the figure raised its hand, and the world around her shifted. Suddenly, she was no longer in the temple. She was standing in the village of Eldros, but it was not as she remembered. The fields were barren, the houses crumbled, and the sky was an endless black void. At the center of the village stood her family, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes filled with despair. "You failed us, Leora," they whispered, their voices echoing in her mind. "You left us to die." Panic gripped Leora's heart. This was her greatest fear, that she would fail in her quest and doom her people to darkness. But then she remembered the words of the voice in the cave. She had come too far, faced too many challenges to give in to fear now. This was an illusion, a test. With a deep breath, Leora closed her eyes and centered herself. When she opened them again, the village was gone, and she was back in the temple. The dark figure stood before her, but now it looked smaller, less menacing. "I am not afraid," Leora said, her voice steady. The figure let out a low growl and began to dissolve into mist. "You have passed the final trial," it said, its voice fading. "The Sunstone is yours." Leora approached the Sunstone, its golden light filling the chamber. She reached out and grasped it, feeling its warmth flow through her. In that moment, she knew that the land would be healed, that the darkness would lift, and that life would return to Eldros. With the Sunstone in hand, she made her way back down the mountain. The journey home was long, but she no longer felt the weight of fear or doubt. She had faced her trials and emerged victorious. When she finally returned to the village, the sky was clear and the sun shone brightly for the first time in years. The villagers gathered around her, their faces filled with hope and wonder. "The light has returned," Ira said, her eyes glistening with tears. "You have saved us all." Leora smiled, holding the Sunstone high for all to see. She had completed her quest, but she knew that her journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new adventures.
Story